Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Hey guys, Ben Dubose here, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of the Rockets, doing a special mini-cast episode of The Lager Line, served to you as always courtesy Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing, reacting to this weekend's news of Jabari Smith Jr. being lost for at least a month with a fracture in his left non-shooting hand. Paolo and I published our full episode on Friday morning, and as fate would have it, within a few hours, there was breaking news that sort of changed the narrative, at least for the time being, of what the Rockets look like over the next few weeks on the floor. Jabari had started at power forward every game this year. Not the flashiest guy, but very solid, averaging about 12 points, 7 rebounds per game, solid shooting from three-point range, reliable mid-range threat, very versatile defensively, spaces the floor, can defend so many positions, had gotten a lot better as a weak side rim protector. So even if he's not someone you immediately think of when it comes to the standout players on this team, I think Alperen Sengun and Amen Thompson, to some extent Jalen Green, would be those guys. You will definitely miss Jabari Smith Jr. So I want to do an episode reacting to, it'll be a short one, but just reacting to the news and talking about what to watch for over the coming games and weeks, because it is a difficult stretch of the schedule. So Jabari going out in a month where it's pretty difficult for you to begin with, and you also don't have Tari Eason for the foreseeable future due to ongoing issues with his lower left leg. Yeah, there's a lot to watch for as the Rockets get back on the court tonight against the LA Lakers, with Amen Thompson starting in place of Jabari Smith at power forward. So first things first, let's talk about the injury and why there is a small silver lining in that it's a fracture to his non-shooting hand. So unlike the Tari Eason situation, and unlike any issues related to ligaments or lower body parts, this is something that when Jabari is cleared, he should be all systems go from the outset. There have been other examples of breaking this same bone, I believe fourth metacarpal non-shooting hand. I looked up a few years ago, Gordon Hayward had the same injury to his left non-shooting hand, had surgery to correct it, which the Rockets do believe that Jabari will need. And Hayward was back in exactly 1 month and playing starters minutes immediately. So Jabari will be able to stay in shape during this, I guess, time off, because obviously it's not an issue with his legs. So there shouldn't be any conditioning issues. It's his non-shooting hand. So pretty much as soon as that bone is healed and he's given medical clearance, he should be able to ramp up very quickly and get back on the floor. So this is not something that should stick with him the rest of the season unless it's just a far worse fracture than the average one in the NBA. And hopefully that won't be the case. This was actually suffered at shoot-around on Friday, so I doubt the injury was all that severe, because you typically don't see players going all out in a shoot-around setting. Not unprecedented, but generally speaking, it's a risk because obviously it's a contact sport. This stuff happens. The Rockets have been fairly lucky this year with injuries. That seems to be turning around in recent weeks, and now they'll have to lean on their depth a little bit to overcome it. But I don't think that, given the setting and what we know about this injury, it taking place in shoot-around, that it's likely to be a significantly worse than usual fracture. And so, knock on wood, assuming that's the case, I think give it 4 to 6 weeks. Worst case, if he needs it, you can sort of buy him an extra week with the All-Star break in mid-February. I think by the end of February, he should be all systems go, like he never left. If anything, maybe he'll be a little bit better because you're letting him have a break in the middle of the regular season to recharge in a way that a lot of younger players need as they're getting used to the 82-game grind. Now, as far as what it means for the Rockets on the floor, I think in a lot of games, it might not be a huge deal because the Rockets are a deep team. We know the Stay Ready crew. Danielle Lerner, new beat writer for the Chronicle, had a really good story about them this weekend. And so beyond the rotation guys, you look at the 10 through 14 spots on the bench where you've got guys like Cam Whitmore, like Jae'Sean Tate, like Aaron Holiday. The Rockets are more able, at least in the short term, to absorb these injuries than most other teams. And so, especially against lesser teams, you can plug and play some of those guys, and you probably won't notice a difference, especially because Amen Thompson as a starter has been tremendous this year. You look at his numbers in the 5 games that he started to date. Rockets are 4-1. The only loss was that improbable one to the Minnesota Timberwolves, in which they looked really good in that game. But Amen as a starter is basically averaging 17 points, 10 boards per game. His true shooting percentage is almost 64. We know how versatile he is defensively, how insanely athletic. He's a lob threat. He does so many things that, no disrespect to Jabari, but no one else on this roster can do, including Jabari. So I think there's a case to be made that Amen Thompson starting at power forward might actually make you a better team relative to Jabari Smith Jr., at least with the starting lineup. Now, it's not that simple because you do have to replace the minutes that you're losing Amen from off the bench with those second units. But number one, the Rockets, they were leaving a little bit of meat on the bone to begin with, playing only 28 minutes per game for Amen Thompson. You can easily stretch that to 36, 38. So you can replace Jabari with Amen. I know there could be some floor spacing concerns because both Amen and Sengun aren't centers, so it won't be a total apples to apples comparison to when Amen started at power forward after Sengun's injury last season next to Jabari Smith Jr. No, now you'll be starting 2 non-shooters in Amen and Sengun, but I think the way Amen moves off the ball, the value he provides as a lob threat, the synergies with Amen and Sengun, which we've seen at times these last 2 seasons, I think they'll find a way to make it work. And when you look at the overall package as a basketball player, no, Amen is not as capable of a shooter as Jabari. He's also not as tall or as thick. But when you look at the versatile defense, the athleticism, the IQ, the handle, all the things that he can bring, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Amen Thompson is a better basketball player than Jabari. And that's not a shot at Jabari. That's more a compliment to Amen and just how good he is. And even if you lose him from the bench units, again, you can mitigate some of that by simply stretching his minutes, Amen, that is, from 28 to somewhere in the 36 to 38 range. And so that'll probably give you just about 20 minutes that you have to fill for those second units that were otherwise going to Amen. I think in the short term, the obvious candidates to replace that will be Cam Whitmore and Jae'Sean Tate. And while there will be a hit going from Amen to Cam or Tate in those minutes, at the same time, because it's largely against backups, it won't be as much as you might think initially. Obviously, we hope that Tari Eason will be able to fill some of those moving forward. In that scenario, you might not feel any impact at all, but Tari's missed 3 weeks. Tonight, I assume, will be his 9th straight absence. He's listed as doubtful, so I'll believe Tari's back when I see it. I think more reasonably, you can expect in the short term Cam Whitmore and Jae'Sean Tate to be the forward options to fill some of those bench minutes that had otherwise gone to Amen. And while there will be a little bit of a hit, I don't think it'll be massive against backups. And I think with the upgrade of, extending Amen's minutes and getting Amen at power forward instead of Jabari, overall, I don't think it's going to be a huge impact against most teams. That's the silver lining. If you can stay healthy, then a lineup of Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Amen Thompson, and Alperen Sengun should be just fine. So while you'll definitely miss Jabari in certain configurations, on the whole, when you consider the depth the Rockets have and being able to lean on guys like Cam Whitmore and Jae'Sean Tate that can be solid NBA players, I think most nights you'll be okay. I do think, however, there is one particular setting where you're really going to miss Jabari, and I think you're especially going to see it against good teams, and that's what makes the timing of Jabari's injury really problematic because you do have a very difficult schedule coming up in the weeks ahead. You've got 2 against Cleveland. I think you've got 3 against Memphis this month. You've also got the Knicks coming up. You've got the Celtics again in Boston. So I believe the rest of the way, the Rockets have the second most difficult schedule in the NBA, and a lot of those come over the next month that We expect Jabari to be out. And in those settings, not having the option of turning to a lineup with Jabari Smith Jr. at the 5 is going to be potentially problematic. I think that was a very valuable insurance policy for Ime Udoka. He didn't do it nearly every game, but they did it disproportionately in high leverage games, high leverage moments against good teams, and you're potentially going to see more of that over the next month. The Rockets are now 22-12 overall, number 2 seed in the West, but it's very tightly packed. There are only about 3 games up on the teams in the 7-8 range in the standings, which would be going through the play-in tournament. So even though superficially it looks like the Rockets are in a great spot, again, these games have a lot of meaning because it would not take a very long skid to send the Rockets from this top 3 position they've been in, it feels like for nearly this entire season, to just scrapping to avoid the play-in tournament. So the Rockets need to take care of business. Hopefully they will, starting tonight against the Lakers, but it's the difficult opponents, the Cavs, the Celtics, the Knicks, the Grizzlies, assuming Ja Morant comes back. Those are the ones that I'm worried about, because Jabari Smith at the 5, with his shooting, the ability to play 5 out, the ability to switch, the ability to step in as a weak side rim protector, that's a very useful hedge and an alternative option to have in games where Alperen Sengun becomes a defensive liability. And we saw some of that on Friday night, that blowout loss to the Celtics. Now, the asterisk I would put on that, obviously, the Rockets did not have Amen Thompson as an option against the Celtics on Friday, serving the second game of the 2-game league suspension. They also were going up against a team in the Celtics that is significantly better than most you will play, even good teams. The Celtics are defending NBA champions for a reason, and they have collective length and skill that they can challenge you, especially when it comes to playing 5 out, in ways that most NBA teams can't. Most NBA teams do not have a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, who's 7'3", 7'4", however tall he is, that's a reliable three-point shooter and can, really challenge you in different ways, the way that we saw Boston do to the Rockets and the way Boston could do to pretty much anybody when they're at their best. And so for a lot of teams, they have to make a choice between playing conventionally or trying to attack with skill and 5 out. And that's where, if Alperen Sengun was particularly a liability on the defensive end of the court, and some of this isn't with Alp specifically, it's more just the way the modern NBA goes with traditional big men. You're seeing more and more, even if teams don't fully commit to 5 out, most teams, especially playoff teams, have an option to go a little bit smaller, more skill, to try and challenge teams that are more traditional with a low post type big man. And of course, the idea is to potentially, run them off the floor. And Sengun isn't, unique in his liabilities on that side of the ball. Again, it's pretty conventional for most NBA big men that are of the more traditional model these days. They're going to be challenged in that same way. So this is not about saying Sengun has a specific problem or a unique problem, but there are some games that it's worse than others. And, are there little things he can do defensively to improve? Yes, and I think earlier in the season, he was a little bit better than he's been the last couple of weeks. But by and large, even the early season model of Alperen Sengun, there are still going to be some nights where it can be a challenge defensively. And it's not about effort. It's not about focus. It's just simply about body type and being able to defend in space out to 25 plus feet. It's really hard with a traditional big man. And so you need other options. Obviously, Steven Adams is not that other option because he's even slower than Sengun is. And so that's where the Jabari at the 5 lineup comes into play. Now, in terms of what the Rockets can do with Jabari Smith Jr. out for the next month to overcome this limitation, the biggest thing is actually going to be whether Alperen Sengun can take a step forward offensively, because we've talked a lot this season about Sengun missing bunnies. The last 2 years, he was averaging about 55% shooting from the field. This year, it's 49%. So if other teams are going to try and attack the Rockets with Sengun on the defensive end, the biggest thing you can do to overcome that is to score at a high level on the other end. In other words, whatever you give up on defense, you make up that much and perhaps then some on offense, because Sengun is taking advantage of them playing smaller and guys that can't defend him near the rim. So if Sengun can get back to finishing at the level he was the last 2 years, when he was shooting about 55% from the field, that would go a long way. Also, we heard after the Celtics game where Alpi had a quick start against Porzingis in the first 6 minutes or so, and then the Celtics started swarming more, which tends to happen when you're going to more agile lineups. And so if they're sending a second defender, make quicker decisions, hit the open man. And some of that comes down to the Rockets finding the right combinations and guys who are respected as shooters and guys that Sengun can trust as shooters. Certainly that's part of it, but make quicker decisions. We saw against the Celtics, he was a little tentative. There were possessions where he took way too long to get going, to hit the open guy. And next thing you know, the shot clock is running out. If they're sending help, if they're swarming because the opponent is a little bit smaller and trying to overcome a lack of size against Sengun on the inside, make quicker decisions. Hit the shooter, hit the cutter, whoever it may be. And again, it's not all on Sengun. Some of it can be who's out there to shoot. Do the guys who need to be cutting, are they cutting at the right time? Do they know what they're doing? Again, it's not to put it all on Sengun. I'm just saying this is how you attack. The idea is that you need to get offensively more than what you're giving up defensively if you're going against a team that's trying to play 5 out and challenge you with speed and floor spacing when you're playing Alperen Sengun. Bottom line, the biggest way to address that concern without having the Jabari at the 5 insurance policy would be for Sengun to simply get better on the offensive end of the court. It's possible because, again, he shot 55% the last 2 years. This year he's at below 50. So he can get better. It's just a matter of him actually doing it. And now would be a better time than ever, because without Jabari, the Rockets are going to have to trust Sengun a little bit more. They don't have the insurance policies that they've had in the past. So they have no choice but to sink or swim with Alpi to some degree. And hopefully they're able to swim. We'll find out starting tonight against the Lakers. In the scenarios where they sink, so to speak, it's going to be more difficult. I do think that even though Amen is 6'7" compared to 6'10" for Jabari, we know his wingspan, we know his hops. I think you can play in a lot of these matchups Amen at the 5. We saw it at times late last season where, especially in the offensive end of the court, he was sort of acting as a lob threat type center anyway and getting tasked with, depending on the physical stature, the defensive assignment of the big man as well, because obviously Jabari is not the thickest guy to begin with. So in some settings, you can try an Amen at the 5 lineup in much the same way you played Jabari at the 5 before, with the idea being if Sengun just isn't working defensively, he's giving up too much, and his offense isn't making up what you're giving up, then you've got to go for more athleticism. Yes, you can use Amen in lineups where you previously used Jabari. However, that's where the question becomes, who's going to replace Amen in those lineups, or where Amen previously was at the 3 or at the 4. And that's where it gets very difficult, because the Jabari at the 5 lineups were used disproportionately in high leverage moments, especially in the second half of games that were really impactful against good teams. So who's going to replace the role that previously belonged to Amen defending at the forward spots if you're instead using Amen at the 5? And because it's super high leverage moments, typically against good teams, I find it tough to expect much from Jae'Sean Tate or Jeff Green, someone like that. They can fill in, I mentioned earlier, asking them to go against backups and they can do fine. Yeah, but the upside is limited. And so if we're talking about potentially a closing lineup, because you get to the fourth quarter and you just can't get a stop with Sengun on the floor, and so you need a little bit more agility, I don't think you want to try and close with Jae'Sean Tate or Jeff Green. You're just not going to have enough firepower in most cases against good teams. Maybe if you have a little bit of a lead going in, you can consider it. But if it's, truly a 50-50 type game or you're trying to come from behind, I don't think it'll work. And so in that scenario, it's not impossible, but I think the two guys you have to look at are Cam Whitmore and Tari Eason. With Tari Eason, obviously, comes back to his leg, just it's a question of, can he play? Is he physically cleared? And for the last 3 weeks, he last played on December 14th. He hasn't been. So Tari would definitely solve this problem. But until he plays, as mentioned earlier, I'm going to assume that he's not. So with the way the roster is currently configured, I think Cam Whitmore is the guy who Ime Udoka is going to have no choice but to trust a little bit more in those types of settings. And it's not going to be easy. There's going to be games like, the one against the Mavs where Cam Whitmore basically won it, 18 points in his first 17 minutes, shot 7 of 9. And then there's going to be games like the next one against Boston where he shot, I think, 3 of 17 and basically shot the Rockets out of the game, it felt like. Cam Whitmore's game, you can see the talent, but it's very volatile. There's a lot of peaks and valleys, but there are the peaks. And so I think leaning on that a little bit more, he does have the athleticism, the length to overcome not having a traditional center. So if you're running a front line of, say, Amen and Cam, along with Dylan Brooks, Fred VanVleet, and Jalen Green, will you be undersized? Sure, but between the elite athleticism of Amen, Cam, and Jalen Green, you can overcome a little bit of that lack of traditional height and length. I think Ime is going to have no choice if you get to a setting where, let's say, you give Sengun a chance and it's just not working out, it's really ugly. I think you're going to have no choice but to trust Cam, because he's the only guy with the upside that when he's right can potentially be a closing piece for you against a good team. And he's also a lot more athletic and taller than Jae'Sean Tate. So it helps to mitigate the height and length deficiency. So that's what I would say. I think option A is just Sengun taking a step forward offensively, and whatever the issues are on defense, you offset them and then some by Sengun making them pay on the other end of the floor. And in some situations, look, I think if Sengun can just get going offensively and have a couple of easy buckets against smaller opponents, the Rockets might not even be tested for all that long of a period with these 5-out lineups, because there's a psychology to it. If the opposing coach sees his smaller team getting bullied by Sengun, or the Rockets getting hot from 3 because they're having to send a help defender, then they may play more traditionally because they'll back out of the lineups that would otherwise prompt a Jabari at the 5 small ball. So it may not be just a constant test of, well, can Sengun offensively make up for what he, cost you on the defensive end? No, it could be that if he gets going offensively, then after 2 or 3 possessions of that, the other coach calls a timeout and says, you know what? This isn't going well. I don't like how this is trending, so I'm going to play more conventionally. And then not having Jabari, at least Jabari at the 5, I should say, becomes less important because the other team is less likely to challenge you in ways that would necessitate that. So that's plan A. But plan B, I think ideally Tari comes back, knock on wood. But if not, I think Cam Whitmore is the guy to watch. One last variable before I close out this little mini pod. Watch Jalen Green over the next few games. I'm curious to see what happens with more of a simplified structure for him that has more athleticism. For starters, since Thanksgiving Eve, his last 15 games, I just posted the numbers to Twitter. He's averaging over 21 points per game, shooting splits of 45% overall, 34% from 3, 87% on free throws, true shooting percentage 57. Not star numbers by any means, but not huge liability numbers either. You can work with that as a starter, especially if he's improved defensively. And I think we were all impressed by what he did on that end against the Celtics, and really, embracing the challenge at times, going up against Jason Tatum one-on-one. So if Jalen Green is competing defensively and he's shooting at least capably offensively with, say what you will, but averaging 21 points per game as the leading scorer on a Rockets team that is great defensively but challenged at times offensively, there's something there. It might not be a star, but over the past 5 to 6 weeks, he's been at least competent as a starter, and that's a good baseline. Well, one thing we know about Jalen Green, A, he's a rhythm player. When he gets more touches, he seems to benefit when he gets more confident. And B, he seems to play better when there's more pace, when there's more athleticism. Well, Amen Thompson is a better athlete than Jabari Smith Jr. And I think with Jabari out, you're also going to have more minutes for Cam Whitmore. We've talked in the past about how the starting lineup, it can be difficult on Jalen at times because the other 4 guys he's grouped with Fred, Dylan, Jabari, and Sengun, none of them are really top shelf athletes that threaten the rim on a consistent basis. So it's easier for defenses to load up against Jalen and protect against his ability to, get into the paint and attack the rim. It's going to be more difficult when now he's out there with Amen Thompson, and he's going to be playing with Cam Whitmore a little bit more as well. And there could be minutes where Jalen, Amen, and Cam are all playing at the same time, especially if you have to lean into these Amen at the 5 lineups because you don't have Jabari. Can that give you a better version of Jalen Green? It's not that Jabari was a high usage guy offensively, but he was someone that at times you would run offense through. You would get him some mid-post touches. He would shoot from 3. Amen is not nearly the shooter, so you don't typically run as much offense through him. He functions a lot more off ball. So I think that may also lead to Jalen having the ball in his hands a little bit more. Perhaps that helps him get into rhythm. So between being more athletic and between Jalen having more touches in general and that potentially helping his rhythm, maybe you get a slightly better version of Jalen Green as a result of these lineup and rotation changes. Not guaranteeing it. I'm just saying it's something to watch because he has been trending upwards. Not like March, nothing crazy, but he has generally been trending upwards over the past 5-6 weeks, the last 15 games or so. And now you're going to be putting him in lineups that on paper should benefit him. And Jalen's actually said this in the past, that he wants to play with more pace, with more athletes. He thinks that benefits him. Well, I think he's going to get more opportunities over the next few weeks. And so maybe the Rockets are hurt defensively. I think certainly in terms of the options for Ime Udoka, they will be without Jabari. But we know that offense has been obviously the issue, especially against good teams for the Rockets. Maybe this helps unlock a better version of Jalen Green on that end. And if that's the case, perhaps that helps you gain offensively some of what you lose defensively. Again, not trying to sunshine pump too much. Jabari is a very good player, and I think someone who's steady, not flashy, but just does a lot of the little things. You don't necessarily appreciate it until it's gone. And so, not trying to mitigate his loss by any means. It is going to be felt. However, if the Rockets are able to avoid any further injuries, knock on wood, I do think there's enough on this team right now when you consider not just the ability to slide Amen Thompson into the starting lineup and scale up his minutes, but also guys near the end of your bench like Cam Whitmore, like Jae'Sean Tate, like Aaron Holiday, to where you shouldn't fall off a cliff. And there are some areas that you might even be a little bit better. There's also going to be some where you're going to be worse, but there are going to be some, if you can stay healthy, that I think you might even be a little bit better. And so, knock on wood, assuming there are no further injuries, that's one area where I think losing Jabari really hurts you. It's that for as long as he's down, you're one more injury away from being really in a pickle because you're going to lean heavily on your depth just to overcome the limitations as is without Jabari and Tari. Anyone else gets hurt, boy, it's going to be really, really hard. And at that point, you might have to look outside the organization, trade deadline coming up for reinforcements. But as currently constructed, you'll miss him. It will be a hit, but I don't think it necessarily has to be a devastating hit. We'll see how things look starting tonight against the Lakers. Anyway, that'll do it for this mini episode, if you will. We'll be back later in the week with a full show. Just wanted to give some initial reaction to the Jabari Smith injury news and what some of the key storylines are as we make our way through the next few weeks without Jabari Smith Jr. Have a good one. We'll talk soon. Go Rockets.